This is Doug Farrar, NFL writer for Sports Press Northwest. Very special guest today as we head to the draft, the 2011 draft, getting close now, less than 2 weeks, and it's the big story with all the lockout stuff going on. The last vestige of real football we have before everything gets very legal. And to kind of go over the pre-draft process, I have a very good friend and very esteemed colleague, Rob Rang, the Senior Draft Analyst for NFLDraftScout.com. Welcome, Rob, and thank you for, in this DEFCON 5 time of yours, appreciate you coming on with us. And
No problem.
wanted to start with the Seahawks and a primary concern with Matt Hasselbeck being allowed to test the market. Talking about the quarterbacks that may or may not be around, who may be around in that 25 range, or they might trade down depending on what happens. But I wanted to start with, obviously Gabbert and Gabbert and Newton would be out of the discussion. But starting with Jake Locker, who, obviously the pressure would be on him if he was taken as a local guy playing with the Seahawks. But I wanted to get your take on a few of these quarterbacks, and starting with Locker, not so much his attributes overall, but how you think he'd fit in the Darrell Bevell offense over time.
Over time, I think he can fit in very well. He has the mobility you're looking for in a West Coast offense, be able to come out and do the rollouts. He has accuracy, the short to intermediate level. He also has the accuracy, rare accuracy, from outside of the pocket. So over time, I think that he could be an ideal fit. We all know that he has the intangibles you're looking for as the face of the franchise quarterback in the NFL. At the same time, I'm not so sure the Seahawks do have that time. And so that's one of our concerns, is just the fact that if the Seahawks are approaching this year's draft with the idea that they do not have Matt Hasselbeck, then they're going to need to draft a quarterback that could potentially play earlier. Obviously, you already have a potential starter in Charlie Whitehurst, but we haven't seen enough to make us believe that he could necessarily be the type of quarterback that's going to lead the Seahawks to repeating as division champs. And so I think that if the Seahawks do elect to draft a quarterback in the first or second round of this year's draft, then most likely is going to be a quarterback who is a little bit more pro-ready, rather than Jake Locker, who, of course, only has the 2 years of pro-style offense under Steve Sarkisian.
And before we get to some of those more pro-ready guys, it's kind of an interesting discussion point, because do you take that lower ceiling guy, like a Christian Ponder, who we can discuss next, because you don't have that bridge quarterback, or do you get a one-year guy? Do you make a trade for a Kyle Orton for expediency's sake to kind of bridge that gap and get the guy like a Locker with the higher ceiling?
I think that if they had the option of trade, then I think the Seahawks would absolutely pursue that avenue. There are a lot of veteran quarterbacks that are available this year, at least potentially, that are available through trade that would make a great deal of sense. Kevin Cobb from Philadelphia would be an ideal fit, in my opinion, in the West Coast offense that Bevell's going to run. So that would make a great deal of sense. Certainly the Carson Palmer angle, that would make sense. You mentioned Kyle Orton, another quarterback that I really think that could come in and be an immediate improvement over what we've seen. We saw the type of success that he had with Denver last season. So if that was an opportunity for the Seahawks, then sure. I think you can take a quarterback that maybe needs a little bit more time to develop, whether that be Jake Locker at 25, even Colin Kaepernick from Nevada. Those types of quarterbacks, that absolutely makes sense. But again, if you don't have that time, and of course there is, there's only a few more weeks until the NFL draft, then the Seahawks may be forced to take a quarterback that can help them a little bit sooner.
And I think we both agree. We both saw him at the Senior Bowl, have been watching him since the Combine and other places. Christian Ponder from Florida State, a guy who's had some injury issues, but really, he's flinging it around at the Senior Bowl during practice week, 40-yard bombs downfield that Courtney Smith kept dropping. And, kind of an underrated arm, does tend to regress a little bit when he's under pressure. To me, he's like a Jeff Garcia plus, but comes into the NFL, and we've both written about it, with kind of an ideal skill set for a Darrell Bevell offense. And you talk a little bit about his potential upside and what makes him an intriguing prospect for any team, because it's not just Seattle. San Francisco, still Minnesota, bunch of West Coast teams still out there still looking for that kind of guy. What does he offer to those teams?
I think that he is the most pro-ready quarterback in this year's draft class. He basically, through a function of the Florida State offense, that he has been asked to make reads of the defense. He's had to passing to complicated routes, make the route progressions, and asking their receivers to read the defense and adjust on the fly. That's something that he's done. And so there's so much of the college quarterbacks in today's college football that have not been asked to do that, have not been asked to take the snap from center, turn their back for play action, things of that nature. That's something that Christian Ponder has shown. And then you mentioned the injury concerns. I mean, this is a quarterback that twice in the last calendar year he's had arm surgery on his throwing arm, and so that of course is a huge concern. He struggled at times mightily this year with durability and with consistency, especially as you mentioned when he was facing some pressure in the pocket. So those are some concerns. At the same time, when he's been healthy, he's been a standout. And so he's going against ACC competition. I was very impressed, I know you were as well, that when we went to the Senior Bowl, after all these concerns about his durability and whether he was healthy or not, he was pulled from the bowl game that Florida State was at, that he came at the Senior Bowl, and for all the talk, all the hype about Jake Locker and all these other quarterbacks there, Christian Ponder was the most consistent quarterback throughout the week of practice. And then he went to the combine, and everybody was talking about all the other quarterbacks. He happened to be, alphabetically speaking, throwing right behind Cam Newton. And every time that we watched Cam Newton struggle, Christian Ponder threw well. And so I thought that was impressive, just to see that the difference between the two of them. I think that he is the most pro-ready quarterback of this year's draft class. I don't know that he has the upside of some of the other quarterbacks in this class, but for a team like Seattle, he might make a lot of sense, just because you could plug him in and he could compete for a starting job with Charlie Whitehurst right away.
And you made this point at Jake's Pro Day, which I thought was great. And going from the Senior Bowl through the combine, through everything, it's the incremental progression that Jake has shown, and Ponder really has shown that too. And I mean, teams kind of had their board set, but how much can a Locker or a Ponder help themselves, maybe confirming themselves as a first-round pick with that gradual, even post-combine improvement?
I think it's different for every player. Certainly at the quarterback position, you show improvement, then we all know the value of the quarterback position. Quarterback value is going to rise up as the draft approaches, just because of the value, the significance of the position. But at the same time, with Jake Locker, it's unique in that he was such a raw quarterback, technically speaking, in terms of his technique and the way he dropped back from center, how he steps into throws, and a lot of that is a function of just the fact that he didn't have a lot of support on the offensive line throughout his time at the University of Washington. So the fact that he has made, as you mentioned, those incremental steps of improvement from his time at Washington to the combine, to the Senior Bowl, to the combine, to his pro day, taking steps of development every step of the way, is just some of the reasons why you believe that he could wind up being an elite NFL quarterback. And he has that upside that we talked about before. With Christian Ponder, to me, the biggest question is durability. It's the health of his arm. If, of course, he gets a clean bill of health from NFL teams, then I believe that he is a potential late first-round quarterback, certainly a value in the top of the second round. Of course, if he doesn't get the clean bill of health, then you could see his stock drop significantly. But if he is healthy, I expect to see both those two quarterbacks wind up certainly in the top 40 picks or so of this year's draft.
Now, you talked about the pro-style offense and multiple reads, doing different things. And another guy who really didn't do that in more of a spread offense, but is gaining a lot of traction as a possible first-round pick. People are starting to point the dart at Seattle for this guy, is Andy Dalton of TCU. Ran more of a spread offense. It was not always read and run. It wasn't always one read. But he rolled out a lot to cut the field in half, to my mind, as opposed to just to be more mobile. A lot of talk about his winning quarterback, but had one of the best defenses in the NCAA over the last couple of years. Certainly he has he may be the best intangibles quarterback of this draft class. Taking the intangibles aside, from a mechanical perspective, is he now a first-round prospect, and can he live up to that at the NFL level?
In my mind, he's not a first-round quarterback. I have him as the 49th best player in this year's draft as a second-round prospect. But at the same time, again, we've talked about the value of the quarterback position. Should the Seahawks be in love with Andy Dalton, Christian Ponder, who, again, I have as a second-round prospect, then I think that it makes some sense for them to reach slightly to make sure that they get the quarterback that they want. Now, again, would I take him at 25? I would not. But at the same time, What's the if this is the quarterback that you believe you can win with, whether it be Andy Dalton, Christian Ponder, Ryan Mallett, Jake Locker, if you believe you can win with him, and he is your favorite among those 3 or 4 or 5 quarterbacks, then what's really the difference between the 25th pick or the 35th pick or the 45th pick when you know that over a year's time in scouting that this is the guy that you really believe in? So to me, it's silly to risk losing him by waiting until the second round. Because one thing is very clear to me in doing the mock projections and talking to scouts, none of these quarterbacks are going to be available at 57 overall, the Seahawks second round pick. So rather than trying to get too cute, it might be wise to draft one at 25. Now, all that said, this is an extraordinary class of defensive linemen that we're looking at here. And the Seahawks obviously have some concern with the defensive line. They have some significant concerns on the offensive line. And so if we do see teams start to reach for quarterbacks, that might lead to a very talented offensive or defensive lineman falling right in the Seahawks' lap at 25. I really believe the Seahawks would be wise to consider those options as well. Certainly if they're able to trade back a few spots and still get a player that makes a lot of sense for them, that obviously makes sense as well.
I want to touch on a couple of guys, a couple of taller guys. One a lot more mobile, one really not. And we'll start with the really not guy, Ryan Mallett, obviously of Arkansas. The Seahawks have shown significant interest, workouts and visits and stuff like that. Doesn't seem to really fit a West Coast offense. And I want it, just from the mobility perspective, probably did more than any other quarterback as far as scanning the field and having the playbook in his head and having to adjust. But how would he fit in this offense? Because that's been the big debate all along.
Well, it really has been the big debate. He comes from Bobby Petrino's offense, which it leads to great statistical success. The fact that he did it against SEC competition, which in my opinion is the best in collegiate football, it is impressive. There's been all this talk about his so-called character concerns and things of that nature. But the reality is that Ryan Mallett is a high school coach's son. He understands football. He is able to read defenses and make adjustments as you'd like. But at the same time, at a legitimate 6'7", he's just a very tall, long-limbed quarterback, and that sometimes that takes him time to reset his feet in the pocket. He is more mobile in the pocket than he's given credit for. He ran a 5'4", 40-yard dash, which is very slow for any quarterback. But at the same time, when are you going to ask a quarterback to run for 40-yard dash?
So Michael Vick. Yeah.
Exactly, and so I think that there can be so much concern about these things that don't really matter so much in terms of pure arm talent. Ryan Mallett is unquestionably the most gifted quarterback in this year's draft class, more than Cam Newton, who I expect to go number 1, more than Blaine Gabbert, who is my number 1 rated quarterback in this draft. But again, for a West Coast offense, as you just mentioned, for Seattle specifically, I don't know that he's a great fit. For Bevel's West Coast offense. My concern is that are the Seahawks going to go with Bevel's West Coast version of the West Coast offense, or are they take a step back and go with what Pete Carroll has traditionally focused on in the past, and that's been a big, strong-arm quarterback that certainly you can use the West Coast principles in terms of horizontal passes to the short intermediate levels, but he also wants someone who can attack deep. And when we saw it this past season with how the Seahawks used Matt Hasselbeck, at times I thought that they were asking Matt Hasselbeck to make throws that he simply didn't have the arm strength to make. So it will be interesting to see exactly what type of offense the Seahawks are going to use. If they, again, use Bevel's offense, then I think that Christian Ponder, Andy Dalton make a great deal of sense. If they're going to go back to the traditional Pete Carroll offense, then perhaps an over-the-top passer like a Ryan Mallett makes some sense as well.
To me, with Mallett, the mobility by choice, when he wants to roll out, is fine. It's the mobility by force.
Exactly.
When he's flushed out of the pocket, things get very disastrous very quickly.
They certainly do. And some of that has to do with the fact that, again, the SEC has incredible talent. And for all of the hype about Arkansas's offensive line, they had a couple of players that got all-conference recognition. They really were proven to not be nearly as talented as maybe their hype would lead you to believe. They were proven that at the Senior Bowl and things of that nature.
Well, who was their right tackle?
DeMarcus Love played left end right tackle, and then Ray Dominguez as well. And both of them got a lot of attention. DeMarcus Love, as you mentioned, played at the Senior Bowl, and he struggled there. And so that's what I'm talking about. There is this belief that Ryan Mallett had a clean pocket at all times. That simply wasn't the case. And once he started to struggle with defenders in his face, and of course everybody started to do that. And it's one of the reasons why he struggled in the SEC championship game. He struggled against Alabama. When the defense started to really blitz him, that was where he started to struggle.
I'll say this about Mallett and the character concerns. I've seen, it was in the bowl game where his receivers were dropping pass after pass after pass. It was horrible. You never saw a flinch. You never saw a facial gesture. You never saw him throw his receivers under the bus on the field. And that impressed me.
Oh, and that is impressive. There's no doubt about it. I still have some reservations about whether he can be the leader of men that you really need in an NFL locker room. I have nothing against Ryan Mallett personally. I think that he is a very good football player, has a talented mind, it certainly has a talented arm. I do have reservations about his true leadership skills. And I mean, let's face it, it takes a very unique leader to be able to, in the fourth quarter of a stadium going absolutely nuts, really keep your composure with 35-year-old men staring at you in the face that, they are protecting you. I don't know that he has that yet. And because I think that the Seahawks need someone who does have that innate leadership ability, then maybe he's not the ideal fit for the Seahawks at 25.
And one more guy I want to talk about, personal favorite, just because I love the pistol offense, Colin Kaepernick from Nevada, and actually reminds me a lot of Jake Locker. Both ran wing T in high school. Both were highly regarded baseball pitchers, which to me explains to a certain extent their release point funkiness. Both are extremely mobile. Kaepernick he's a taller guy, not really gangly. I mean, he's got some muscle on him, but I wanted to get your take on A, where you see him, because he's another guy like Dalton who's been getting some traction lately, and B, because the pistol, just to explain it briefly, it's not a full shotgun, it's not under center, it's quarterback's 3 yards back, running back's 4 yards behind that. It's a lot of play action, some triple option, stuff like that. How ready do you think Colin Kaepernick is for the NFL?
That's my concern. I don't believe that he is ready for the NFL. He's got a wow arm. He can absolutely rifle any pass that you want to see, but at the same time, as you mentioned with the throwing motion, when he throws the ball, he's way up here rather than closer to his ear. And so that, it might seem like a slight difference, but that gives defensive backs, of course, who are more talented than anything he's ever seen, that gives them that split second more of time to react to the pass. And so it takes away some of the speed, or some of the velocity, I should say, of his throwing motion. We've all heard about linebackers, for example, that run in the 4.4s, but then it seems like a slower guy, like maybe Lofa Tatupu, for example, because of his instincts, is actually there on the scene faster than a player that might run a lot faster in the 40-yard dash and things of that nature. Colin Kaepernick has an amazing arm, but at the same time, he takes away from that because of that throwing motion. And so when we did an interview with him, and he said that NFL teams, were not asking him to change his throwing motion. I know when I've spoken to NFL teams, they are.
Yeah, he told me the same thing, and I was kind of...
Yeah, that surprises me. I mean, the reality is there is no question of his production. He was absolutely dominant while at Nevada. He had a very strong week of practice throughout the Senior Bowl. He was impressive at the Combine as well. But at the same time, at the Senior Bowl, I think the expectations were very low. It was to see what can this kid do, and the fact that he didn't trip and fall all over himself, I think that just kind of reinforced that, hey, this is a competitor. This is a player who's working on this. But at the same time, I still think that he is at least a year, perhaps 2 years away from being able to contribute to an NFL offense as a true starter. And so therefore, I'm not so sure that he's a great fit for the Seahawks. But I do believe that he has the talent, the size, the arm strength, everything you're really looking for, including the leadership skills, to be a successful NFL quarterback once he gets some time.
It's a very interesting potpourri of NFL quarterbacks this year. If the Seahawks decide to go with that position at 25, and they certainly could, they have a lot of interesting options. So that's our discussion about the quarterbacks for the Seahawks. This is Doug Farrar with Rob Rang.